Everyone at Blackwood Academy knew one thing about Ethan Cole. He was the weakest student in the building. He ranked last every single month. He never spoke in class unless someone asked him a direct question. He wore the same plain gray hoodie every day, sat alone at the far end of the cafeteria, and walked through the halls with his head slightly bowed, as if the world around him was too loud and he simply preferred to stay invisible. Nobody gave him a second look, and that was exactly the way he wanted it. The academy was not an ordinary school. Blackwood was an institution for young people with supernatural abilities, students from powerful family lines who had been raised to know their rank from the moment they were old enough to understand what a rank meant. Every student was assessed monthly in the main hall. Their strength, speed, and inner power were measured and recorded in front of everyone. The results were posted on the main board by the entrance, and within minutes, the entire school knew exactly where you stood. Ethan Cole always stood at the very bottom. The students laughed every time his name appeared there. Some did not even bother to look. They already knew where he would be. What none of them knew, what not a single person inside those walls understood, was that Ethan Cole was not his real name, and weakness was not his real condition. His real name was Kael Draeven, and outside those gates, in a world the academy students barely understood, he was the Alpha King, the most powerful supernatural authority on the entire continent. Packs answered to him. Leaders bowed when he walked into a room. Wars had been stopped by a single letter carrying his seal. He had spent years earning that title through patience, discipline, and a level of strength that most people never saw once in their lifetime. He was not at Blackwood because he needed an education. He was there because of a girl. Her name was Lena Hayes, and she had no idea what she meant to him. 3 years earlier, Kael had been ambushed by members of an enemy group called the Velthorn Coalition, a dangerous faction that had been trying to remove him from power for years. The ambush was well planned, and he had been badly injured while crossing through a forest near a small town on the eastern edge of the country. He had managed to escape, but not without paying a price. He had collapsed near the edge of the trees, too exhausted to move, and he had stayed there through a cold night, certain that he would be found by morning. Instead, a girl found him first. She was 16 years old, walking back from an early morning trip to the market, and she nearly tripped over him in the tall grass at the edge of the forest path. She did not scream. She did not run. She knelt beside him, checked his breathing, and without hesitating, she tore strips from the scarf around her neck and pressed them firmly against the deepest of his wounds. She talked to him while she worked, even though he was barely conscious, telling him quietly that it was going to be fine, that she had read enough to know what to do, and that he was not allowed to give up before she got him somewhere safe. He did not fully understand what she said. He was fading in and out, but he remembered her voice. He remembered the steadiness of her hands, and he remembered that she stayed with him for 2 full hours in the cold grass without complaint, holding pressure on his wounds, and calling out softly to a neighbor who happened to pass by on the road, asking for help with a calmness that most trained soldiers did not possess under pressure. She saved his life, completely, without knowing who he was, without asking for anything in return, and without ever learning what had actually happened to him. By the time his people reached him the following morning, she was gone. He had been moved to the neighbor's barn. The neighbor said a girl had brought him there, and made sure he was comfortable before disappearing. He never got her name. It took his people nearly a week to trace who she was. Lena Hayes, scholarship student, no supernatural bloodline on record, accepted to Blackwood Academy on the basis of pure academic achievement. A completely ordinary young woman who had, without any hesitation or any awareness of what she was doing, kept the most powerful supernatural leader on the continent alive through a cold night with nothing but a torn scarf and calm hands. Kael had never forgotten it, and when, 2 years later, intelligence reached him that the Velthorn Coalition had begun tracking individuals connected to him, specifically looking for people he might care about, her name came up in a file he was never supposed to see. She was not a target yet, but she would become one. He made a decision that his advisors strongly disagreed with. He enrolled at Blackwood Academy under a false identity, suppressed every trace of his actual ability, and placed himself close enough to protect her, without her ever knowing she needed protection. It was, as plans went, deeply inconvenient. He was 21 years old, sitting through lectures on basic ability control that he had mastered at the age of 14, pretending not to notice when students pointed at his name at the bottom of the ranking board and laughed among themselves. He endured it with the same patience he applied to everything. He had made harder sacrifices for smaller reasons. The first time he spoke to Lena properly was an accident. He had seen her in passing every day since he arrived, always moving quickly, always carrying too many things, always a little late to wherever she was going. She had a bright, slightly distracted energy that reminded him of something warm. He kept a careful distance. He was there to protect her, not to involve her. But on a Tuesday afternoon in the second week of term, she came running around the corner at the end of the east corridor, at exactly the moment he was walking in the opposite direction, and the collision was immediate and complete. Books went everywhere. Her most important one, a worn journal he recognized from the description in her file as belonging to her late mother, flew toward the ground, and he caught it before it landed. His reflexes, suppressed or not, were simply too fast to override completely when something mattered. She looked up at him from where she had landed against the wall, slightly dazed, and he held out the journal without a word. She stared at it for a moment, then looked at him. "Thank you," she said. Her voice was the same as he remembered, steady, clear, a little surprised but not unnerved. He nodded once and walked away. She stood in the corridor for longer than was necessary after he left. Something about his eyes had unsettled her in a way she could not name. They were very still, calm in a way that felt unusual for someone in a school hallway. She had seen that kind of calm before. She could not remember where. That night, she mentioned it to her best friend Zoe Park, who shared her room and had the useful habit of noticing everything. "Ethan Cole," Zoe said, not looking up from her textbook. "Last place every month. You are aware he is the bottom of every single ranking this school produces." "I know," Lena said. "There was just something about him." Zoe looked up then. "Something about him," she repeated, in the tone of someone filing information away very carefully. In the weeks that followed, a required group project brought them together properly. An assignment from the Academy administration paired students from opposite ends of the ranking board, which Lena privately thought was either a kindness or an experiment, and which Ryder Vance, the top-ranked student and the loudest voice in any room he entered, treated as a personal insult. "Why?" Ryder announced to no one in particular, with the full confidence of someone who had never been told he was being unpleasant. "Would they put the bottom of the board in a group with students who are actually working toward something?" "I imagine," Lena said from across the table, without looking up from her notebook, "because the assignment requires it. Which you would know if you had read the briefing." The table went quiet. Ryder stared at her. Ethan, seated 2 chairs down, did not react visibly, but something in him settled slightly. A quiet, uncomplicated approval. He and Lena worked together steadily after that. She was sharp and organized, and asked good questions. He was precise and thorough, in a way that struck her as unusual for someone who apparently struggled with everything the Academy measured. He never missed a detail. He never offered more than he needed to, but everything he contributed was exactly right. "You're not actually bad at this," she told him one evening, when they were the last 2 left in the library. It was not an accusation. It was an observation. He looked at her for a moment. "No," he said simply. She waited to see if he would explain. He did not. She went back to her notes and decided to leave that thread alone, for now. The moment that changed everything happened on an unremarkable Wednesday evening. She reached past her to take a reference book from the shelf, and his sleeve shifted upward. She saw the scar before she had time to look away. A long, jagged line running along the inside of his forearm, old and healed, with a distinct shape she recognized without fully understanding why she recognized it. She had pressed her scarf against a wound that shape once. In a forest. In the early morning. 3 years ago. She did not say anything. She sat very still while he took the book and returned to his seat, and she stared at the table surface for a long moment while something rearranged itself quietly in the back of her mind. That night, she opened her mother's journal and found an entry she had read once years ago and not thought about since. Her mother had written about a young man who came to their door 2 days after Lena had helped a stranger near the forest. He had not given his name. He asked after Lena carefully, was she unhurt, was she well, and then left before morning without coming inside. Her mother had written, He had the most serious eyes I have ever seen on a young person. He seemed like someone carrying a great deal. Lena read the entry 3 times. Then she looked at the scar in her memory, and she looked at the eyes she had seen in the corridor on the first day of term. And the pieces arrived quietly, without drama, in exactly the right order. She went to find him the next morning. He was on the rooftop, a place she had discovered he visited early, before the school woke up, where the air was clean and the view stretched far enough to see the tree line at the edge of the city. She came up the stairs and stood beside him without announcement, and they both looked out at the skyline for a while without speaking. Then she said, "Were you ever near the forest east of Millhaven, about 3 years ago?" He was quiet for a long time, a very long time, long enough that she almost thought he would not answer. "Yes," he said. "Was that you I found?" Another pause. Shorter this time. "You saved my life." She let out a slow breath. She had known it before he confirmed it, but hearing it still landed differently than she expected. She sat down on the low wall at the edge of the rooftop and looked at her hands. "You could have just said thank you," she said. "You didn't have to enroll in school and sit at the bottom of every list for 2 months." He almost smiled. She caught the edge of it before he controlled it. "It was not only about gratitude," he said. "I know," she said quietly. "I'm not an idiot." She looked up at him. "Someone is looking for you. And they found out about me." He did not confirm or deny it. He did not have to. "Okay," she said after a moment. She stood up and smoothed her jacket. "Then you should probably tell me what I need to know, because I am not going to be protected properly if I do not know what I am being protected from. And before you argue, I kept you alive in a field with a torn scarf. I think I have earned some information." He looked at her for a long, measured moment. And then, for the first time since he had arrived at Blackwood Academy, Ethan Cole, who was not Ethan Cole at all, told someone the truth. The evening that the truth became known to everyone else was not planned. It was the result of a chain of decisions made by a man who had miscalculated badly. Director Marcus Ashford had known who Ethan was from the beginning. He had allowed the situation to continue not because he was kind, but because he saw an opportunity, a way to position himself between 2 powerful forces and extract whatever advantage the gap between them might offer. He had been feeding careful pieces of information to outside parties for weeks. He believed he was in control. He was not. When the Velthorn operatives he had quietly led onto the campus grounds were neutralized before they reached their target, completely and efficiently, by a small team that had been quietly in position for days without anyone noticing, Ashford understood that he had underestimated the situation. He made a last, desperate decision. He triggered the Academy's internal broadcast system and announced Ethan's real identity to the entire building. Name, photograph, title, everything. His calculation was that public exposure would create enough chaos to give him room to escape the consequences of what he had done. What he did not expect was the silence. The announcement played through every speaker in Blackwood Academy. Every student heard it. Every teacher heard it. And then, in the main hall and the corridors and the cafeteria and the library, a total quiet settled over the building. The kind of quiet that happens when hundreds of people all feel something at the same moment. Because the moment his real identity was spoken aloud, Kael Draeven stopped suppressing himself. He let everything he had been containing for 2 months simply exist, and every person in that building who had any supernatural sensitivity at all felt it like a change in the weather. Something vast and certain, filling the space of the entire hall without effort, without aggression, simply present in the way that mountains are present. Ryder Vance, standing 10 feet away, went completely still. The confident expression on his face did not change so much as dissolve. Quietly, without drama, the way a flame goes out when the air is gone. Kael stood in the center of the hall and looked around at every face. He did not perform it. He did not raise his voice. He simply allowed the room to understand, without any words being necessary, that what they had believed about the boy in the gray hoodie had never been accurate. His eyes moved through the crowd and found Lena standing at the far edge of the hall. She was watching him with an expression he recognized. Not fear, not awe, but something more careful. The same expression she had worn on the rooftop the night before, when he had finally told her everything. The expression of someone processing a large amount of information and deciding what to do with it. She gave him a small, steady nod. He found that it helped. Ashford was removed from his position that evening. The outside authorities were contacted. The operatives were handed over. The students who had witnessed everything filed quietly out of the halls and talked in low voices in their rooms. And by morning, the story had spread further than the academy's walls, as stories of that size always do. In the days that followed, Blackwood was reorganized under a temporary leadership council. The monthly ranking system, it turned out, was reviewed quite urgently once people began asking exactly who had designed it and for what purpose. Ryder Vance was suspended, pending a review of the combat assessment incident. Several other things were quietly reconsidered. Kael stayed. This surprised a number of people who expected him to leave immediately, return to his responsibilities, and allow Blackwood to become a chapter that was finished. He had every reason to go. His mission was complete. The threat to Lena had been handled. There was no logical reason to remain. He remained anyway. He sat in the same cafeteria, at a different table now, no longer alone at the far end, but in the middle of the room, where Lena set her tray down across from him on the first morning, as if this was simply where she sat now, and Zoe arrived 2 minutes later, with the energy of someone who had many questions, and had been very patiently waiting to ask them. "So," Zoe said, settling into her seat with great intent. "Alpha King, entire continent. You sat at the bottom of our ranking board for 2 months. Yes," Kael said. "On purpose." "Yes." Zoe looked at Lena. Lena looked at her coffee. A small smile moved across her face that she did not bother to hide. "Right," Zoe said, and opened her textbook with the air of someone who had received all the information they needed. "Okay, fine." Outside the academy walls, the world was still complicated. The Velthorn coalition had not disappeared. The work that Kael had left behind was still waiting for him. There were decisions to make, meetings to hold, and a great deal of responsibility that could not be set aside for very long. But on that morning, in an ordinary cafeteria in an academy that had spent 2 months entirely wrong about who was sitting in its lowest-ranked seat, the Alpha King ate breakfast across from the girl who had once saved him in a field without knowing what he was, and they talked about nothing important for a while, and it was, in a quiet way, enough. Lena had said something to him the night before, when they stood again on the rooftop and the city lights stretched out below them in the dark. She had said, "You spent 2 months making yourself small so that I would be safe. That is either the most careful thing anyone has ever done for me, or the most unnecessary." He had thought about that. "Both," he said. She had laughed. Not a polite laugh, but a real one, warm and sudden, and it caught him completely off guard in a way that very few things in a very long time had managed to do. "Both," she agreed, and she looked out at the lights. "Don't do it again without telling me." He did not promise that he would not need to protect her again. He could not make that promise honestly, but he could make a different one. "I will tell you," he said. "Everything. From now on." She considered that for a moment. Then she nodded. Once, the way she had nodded at him across the hall. Steady, clear, decided. The world outside was still complicated. The road ahead was still long. But she had kept him alive in the dark once, with nothing but calm hands, and the certainty that giving up was not acceptable. He thought, not for the first time, that the most powerful thing he had ever encountered was not a title, or a rank, or a bloodline. It was a girl who had knelt down in the cold grass beside a stranger and simply refused to walk away.